Bonjour. I've just decided to record this video for parents. Students can watch it as well, of course, but how to help your child succeed in French GCSE. So if you're not sure what the exam is entails of, what sort of things that your child needs to know, need to be revising for, and how they can do that, then this video is for you. Just a little bit about me if you don't already know me and you've come across this video. I lived in France for 20 years. I've been tutoring for more than 20 years. I'm a UK qualified French teacher. I always forget to say that I was a head of languages at my last school, and I have a master's in education. I'm now an examiner for 3 exam boards, and I run the tuition company, Miss Dubrevet French Tuition. So, understanding the French GCSE, there are 4 skills that are examined. So, your child will be tested on listening, speaking, reading, and writing, and all of those are tested at the end of year 11. Each skill is 25% of the final grade, so they all have equal weighting. Students will be entered into either foundation or higher tier. Now, not all GCSEs have this, so it's useful to know. If your child is entered into foundation, the highest grade they could get is a grade 5, which is still a really good grade for an MFL, a language GCSE. So you will have shorter and simpler tasks, and overall, it will be a slightly easier exam. The higher GCSE will allow you to get to a grade 9. It's more complex. The level of difficulty goes up quite a lot. And the difference is that you really do need to be accurate. Whereas for foundation GCSE, I would say that the onus is more on communication. So you could get away with making lots more mistakes as long as you're communicating what you want to say. The issue with a higher, if you're not sure that your child is going to be at least grade 5, probably grade 6 or above, there is the worry that they may drop under a grade 4. And in higher, grade 4 is the lowest grade you could get, so that you could potentially end up with a U if you don't get high enough marks to get a grade 4. So your teacher, your school will advise you on this, and it should be a conversation with you as a parent, and perhaps, and the child certainly with their teacher. There are 3 themes in the GCSE. I'm going through AQA exam board mostly at the moment because that's what most people do. The Edexcel is the second most common one, and that will be very, very similar. But please do message me if you've got any questions about the differences. So the themes here are identity and culture, local, national, international, and global areas of interest, and current and future study and employment. And there's lots and lots of topics and subtopics. So it's really important that you start studying for a GCSE really early. You can't cram for a language GCSE. There's too much content. So they should start looking at vocabulary each week. So getting into the routine of a few minutes every day of going onto one of these websites potentially, or you might have been given lists to learn from school, or you might have the textbook, which will have the key vocabulary. So Quizlet, Memrise, Duolingo is a great website. It won't be GCSE specific, but it's good for learning different vocabulary. And Languages Online is another useful website. And make a revision timetable. I'm recording this in January. It's kind of the rundown to the exams now. And obviously, the earlier you can do this, the better. But this is an example of something I've made for some of my students. I've taken each week going up to the exams. I've worked out how many topics and subtopics there are. And then I've made sure that I'm covering all the different skills. So I've got listening and reading, I've got speaking and writing, and then grammar and vocabulary. And there's lots of different websites you can use. The exam boards have lots of material on them themselves, so you can Google and go onto AQA website, for example, and find past papers and the mark schemes. BBC Bite Size is another good website where you can go to your specific exam board, and there's lots and lots of practice questions. So, looking at the skills individually, what's required in the speaking? So, speaking, there will be some parts of the speaking that you can prepare in advance of the exam, but you are also being examined on responding to unpredictable questions. So, there you will be asked things that you don't know in advance. There's three parts to the exam. You've got a role play, a photo card, and the general conversation. The role play and the photo card you'll be given before you go into the exam, and you've got some preparation time to write down the answers to the questions you've been given. But when you go into the exam, you will have some questions related to the theme of what the photo card is. As you can imagine, there's a photo, and you have to describe it and answer questions related to the topic. And then the general conversation will be about which topics you haven't covered in the photo cards. So your school might ask you to prepare specific questions and answers, but you can't know what questions you're going to be asked exactly. So you'll normally need to prepare lots of different answers. Useful resources again, I mentioned BBC website, AQA website, or Edexcel, or whatever exam board that you're doing. Teach It is aimed more at teachers, but there's some really useful resources on there. You can make a free account and access lots of stuff for free. Duolingo again. And for speaking, it's important to know that you don't just know your vocabulary, but you know how to say it. And an audio dictionary can be good for that. So rather than just see the word, you listen to the word and how it's pronounced. Common mistakes in speaking, not knowing the question words. The role play relies on you knowing the question words, what, who, which, why. Using repetitive language. We want to see a variety of language, so not just repeating the same opinions, for example. You need to justify opinions to get the top grades. So that would be on a simple level, I like this because, and to get top marks in either of the exam, in the foundation or the higher, you need to have included a past tense, which is the hardest thing to do in French, but you need to make sure that you know one or two phrases at least if you're doing foundation, and a lot more if you're doing higher to obtain that top bracket. What do I want to see as an examiner? Develop sentences. So develop sentences means longer sentences, and specifically sentences that use more than one verb. So I'm looking for 2 or 3 verbs, not for every sentence, but you need to develop most of your sentences. And complex opinion phrases. So your child will know I like, I don't like, I hate, I love in French, but can they come up with some more interesting phrases like I think that, I would say that, 3 time frames, so that's present, past, and future, and a variety of language. So as I said earlier, not repeating, not using the same nouns, not using the same adjectives, like it's good, it's bad, over and over again. Think of some subject specific adjectives so you can talk about different things. So what about the reading? What can you expect for the reading? So there's comprehension questions on a range of topics, and there's a translation from French to English. There are 2 sections, one which will have the questions in English, one which will have the questions in French. And the important thing to know here is that if the questions are in English, you answer in English. If the questions are in French, you answer in French. Some of the same resources as before. Also, the National Oak Academy that you might remember from COVID. You could find some interesting things on there. Light bulb languages. It's got lots of different activities for different age groups, but it might be that you want to go back to some of the basics. So if your child hasn't done one of the topics for a long time, because they are expected to know more than GCSE, they're expected to have a prior knowledge from Key Stage 3. So it's always a good idea to go back over some of the basic topics as well. And again, Teach It, which I mentioned earlier, is another website. Common mistakes in reading are really just not knowing enough vocabulary. I can't say this enough. There's a lot of content in the GCSE. There's a lot of vocabulary. And also in the reading, they will find vocabulary that they don't know. It's put in there deliberately because the skill isn't to be translating in the reading paper for most of the questions. You need to be picking out key information from text. So there'll be longer text that will have words in them on the syllabus that you won't know, and you have to try and work out from your skills of deduction. So it's a bit like in English where you have your skimming and scanning skills to find out key information. You need to use this in the French exam as well. There is a translation as one of the questions, which will be testing you on different time frames. So again, is it present, is it past, is it future tense? So it's really important to get that right. Not answering all questions. I don't know why this happens, but most of the questions are multiple choice. So there's absolutely no reason to leave a blank answer in a multiple choice. If you don't know the answer, you haven't got a clue, you're going to make a guess because you've got one out of three chance of getting it right. So absolutely don't leave things blank. The one thing I haven't mentioned that's written on this slide is recognizing word families and related words. So for example, you might have a verb like acheter, to buy, and then the word achat means a purchase, something that you buy. It's a noun. So it's recognizing those similarities between words so that you know what they might mean. And in the listening, understanding spoken French in different accents and speeds. And again, it has two sections, questions in English, questions in French. A few more websites to look at this time. News in Slow French, in particular, is a good one. Talks about current affairs, and you can listen to it at different speeds. It also has a transcript of what's been said, so you can have a look at that, and you can click on the more difficult words, the trickier words, to find out what they mean. So that's a really good website. Lyrics training will be listening to French songs and learning French through the lyrics. Un jour and actu is a nice site. French is quite complex, although it's a website aimed at children, but it's aimed at French children. And again, it's current affairs and different topics, but they're in cartoon format, so it makes it easier to understand because you've got the images as well as the words. So common mistakes, as in the reading, not enough topic vocabulary, not answering all the questions, and not understanding those French sound spelling rules. It's really important that you know phonics because the French words do not sound out. So if you've ever learnt Spanish, for example, every syllable, every letter pretty much is pronounced. In French, there's a lot of silent letters, so you need to know the rules of how those words sound to be able to recognize them. So understanding French phonics, recognizing distractor words, I've put in bold here because it's really one of the most important things. There's lots of small words that will change the meaning of a sentence, and you'll find lots of those in the reading and the listening exam. And things like negatives, words like but, however, so that you might be asked to say what somebody's opinion is on something, and they might say they like something and then say mais or cependant or another word that changes the meaning, and they're about to say the opposite. Again, no blank answers. There's always something you can guess, even in the section where you're answering in French. Writing, again, these are quite different depending on whether you're doing foundation or higher. So foundation is more sentence level and small paragraphs and translating from English to French, which you have to do in the higher as well, but you do then have a longer essay to write. So I say an essay, it's about 140, 150 words, so it's not huge, but it's significantly more than what you have to do for foundation. Writing is perhaps harder to self-study because you really could need some feedback on how you've done. But again, look on those same websites. Um, really look at the past papers and how they're marked as well, so you can see what you need to be including in your answers. So common mistakes for writing is using repetitive language. You can get away with it to a certain extent in the foundation exam, but for higher, well, both really, we want to see variety of language. So different opinions, different adjectives. That's really important because people often fall down on not knowing different words to describe things. If you only use two time frames, so for example, you speak in the present and in talking about what you might want to do in the future, you can't access those top marks. Not extending sentences, because what I've put in as what I would like to see as an examiner at the bottom of this slide is I want developed sentences, meaning I want you to add extra information, I want you to use more than one verb. And for the higher exam in particular, I want accurate verbs. It's okay to be making small mistakes. You can get top marks and make mistakes, but it's where you make those mistakes that's important. So if you have accurate verbs in your sentence, the examiner is going to be more forgiving if you've misspelt nouns or adjectives, but we understand what they mean. So accurate verbs, and we need accurate verbs at foundation level as well, but just not so many of them. If you see an example of an accurate verb in the present tense, the future tense, and the past tense, one example, you'll be able to access those higher marks. But at higher level, we'll want to see more than one example. So how can you help? Because we're presuming that a lot of us don't speak the language. So how on earth are you going to help for a French exam? Well, you can still test your child because you can read the English vocabulary for your child then to tell you what the French meaning is. You can ask some of the general conversation questions that they'll have to practice, and they'll be correcting your pronunciation as well, which is good for them. Watched films or TV series together. There's lots of French series or films either on Netflix or on BBC iPlayer, and you can find lots of things in French, which I think would be the best thing to do, and have the English subtitles on so you know what's happening, but you'll still be tuning in, you'll still be listening to that French, which is really important. You can change other programs to French, the French language, if you want to. But I would say look for French series or films. Buy a bilingual dictionary, and encourage your child to use it instead of online translators. So either a bilingual dictionary or a bilingual dictionary online, but don't use Google Translate because it's not always accurate. So I would say try to write yourself. Don't get an online translator to do it, but there's a good way of checking your accuracy is a website called reverso.net. Reverso, that's reverso.net, and you can translate things on there and it's quite accurate, much more accurate than Google Translate. You can also put your own writing in there and it will check for mistakes. So that's a really good way of, if you're practicing your writing, put a paragraph in there and it will check it and tell you whether you've made any mistakes, particularly for the grammar. Things you can encourage your child to do, create mind maps. I mean, everyone learns differently, so there could be some things that work for your child and some things that don't. Mind maps could be a good thing for the different topics, putting subject-specific verbs and adjectives, for example, around. You could use revision cards. I like to get those coloured cards and use a different colour for a different type of word. So you could have one for nouns, which is one colour, and then one for verbs, which is a different colour. Use the look, cover, write, check technique. Now, probably that your child's used this in primary school if they haven't used it in languages. But literally looking at the words, covering it over with their hands, writing it down, and then checking to see if they've got it right, and then doing that over and over. Choose a topic and talk about it for 1 minute. That's going to be really helpful for the speaking exam. Sticky notes. I used to put things all around the house when I was learning French. So if there's keywords or difficult words that you find hard to remember, post-it notes, put them on the door of the toilet, put them on the stairwell, anywhere where you're walking past all the time, and have a look at those. Learning apps, things like Duolingo and Memrise, again, are always good. Posters, same idea, but with the post-it notes, but something maybe bigger, like verbs you could write out in different tenses. And for the speaking, it's a good idea to record your answers on your phone and then listen to them back. So that's going to help you to remember them. So recording is going to help you to be focusing on the pronunciation. You could get your teacher to listen and make sure it's okay, and then listen to it as often as possible to remember. So consistency really is the key. It's all about doing little and often rather than leaving it all to the last minute. A few minutes every day is better than trying to do a few hours a couple of weeks beforehand. Being positive, celebrating every small bit that your child does because they are going to be under pressure at this time of year. Staying positive, It doesn't matter if you have a bad day, if you make mistakes, just carrying on. And it's about building their confidence that they can do this, because often with languages that can be the big issue, that your child is lacking confidence in their abilities, and they can do it. It's just it can seem overwhelming sometimes. So again, that comes back to that little and often, of vocabulary learning, practicing exam style questions, anything to do with French, listening to French music, watching French TV, all of that will help. So ways that I can help, follow my Facebook group if you haven't already, because I do put a lot of links to different things for learning. So it might be Quizlet study set, it might be a video, it might be a link to a post on my blog. You can sign up to my newsletter. So you can send me, again, you'll find a link to that on my Facebook page, but also you can email me. And that again, it's only once a month, but it sends out different tips and links to articles and things like that. If you want to, you can sign up to a small group or one-to-one tuition if I've got space, or I can refer you to somebody that I know, as it can be really good to have that more focused, whether it's a small group. For example, my group's 6 people maximum. If it's a small group, there's also room for people to get individual attention and feedback on their answers, or one-to-one tuition, of course. Or I also offer sessions in the holidays. That can be a really good way for, say, your child wants to practice their speaking answers before the exam. Then a one-to-one tuition in the holidays can work really well. Otherwise, I'm here to answer questions and help out, whether or not you're a current student or not. So you can look at my website, which is more of a blog, really. So if you go onto missduble.com, you'll see lots of articles and advice. You can email me on the address below if you have any questions. I will be happy to help. And bon courage. Good luck to all of the students doing their exams this year.